1:47 a.m. in Houston, Texas, when Mark Reynolds, a 32-year-old Uber driver, looked at his phone screen while sitting inside his parked car outside a closed gas station. And for a moment, he thought about ending his shift because the roads were getting emptier and the night felt heavier than usual. But before he could even decide, his phone suddenly lit up with a new ride request that made his stomach tighten instantly, because the pickup location was Hollow Creek Road, a place every driver in the area avoided due to strange reports of people hearing voices, cars stalling, and passengers who never existed. Yet the payout on the screen was unusually high, almost double the normal fare. And Mark hesitated for a few seconds, telling himself it was probably just a normal drunk passenger or system glitch. So against his better judgment, he accepted the ride. And the moment he did, the app froze for half a second before updating the passenger name to unknown, with no profile picture, no rating, no history, nothing at all. And that alone made him uncomfortable, because in all his years driving Uber, he had never seen a completely blank profile like that. But he forced himself to breathe and started driving toward the pickup point. As he drove deeper into the city outskirts, something fell off immediately, because traffic disappeared faster than normal. Street lights began flickering in irregular patterns, like they were reacting to his car specifically, and even the GPS voice sounded slightly distorted, like it was speaking through static, repeating turns too slowly as if unsure of its own directions. And when Mark tried to switch apps or check signal strength, everything on his phone worked fine except the Uber screen, which stayed locked on the route like it was forcing him forward. And then he noticed something even stranger. The closer he got to Hollow Creek Road, the quieter everything became. No dogs barking, no insects, no wind. Just a heavy, unnatural silence that felt like sound itself had been removed from the environment. And Mark swallowed hard, telling himself it was just paranoia. But his grip on the steering wheel tightened anyway as he crossed the final intersection leading into the forest road. Once he turned onto Hollow Creek Road, the atmosphere changed completely, because now there were no street lights at all, only darkness broken by his headlights. And the trees on both sides of the road looked unnaturally close, like they were leaning inward to watch him pass. And his radio suddenly turned on by itself for half a second, producing a burst of static before shutting off again, which made him jump slightly. But what truly unsettled him was when the GPS voice changed tone and repeated, arriving at destination, even though there was nothing ahead except a broken road stretching into the forest. And Mark slowed down, scanning for any sign of a person, but there was nothing. No house, no car, no light, just an old rusted bus stop bench under a single flickering lamp that turned on and off like it was struggling to stay alive. And when he finally stopped the car there, the engine suddenly felt louder in the silence, like the world outside had stopped responding to it. Mark looked at his phone again and saw, arriving in 0 minutes, even though no one had entered his car. And that's when the first real wave of fear hit him, because the app clearly thought the passenger was already inside, and slowly, almost unwillingly, he turned his head toward the back seat, expecting to see someone, but the interior light flickered once and went dim. And in that brief second, he thought he saw a faint shadow sitting directly behind him. But when he looked properly, the seat was empty, perfectly empty. Yet the seat belt hanging behind him slowly moved upward, as if being pulled by invisible hands, clicking once as if fastening itself around something. And Mark whispered, "Hello? Passenger?" But there was no answer, only silence so thick it felt physical, like pressure inside the car. Then suddenly, the rear right door unlocked by itself with a sharp mechanical click, making Mark flinch violently. And before he could react, the door slowly swung open outward into the darkness. But there was no wind, no sound, nothing entering or leaving the car. And after a few seconds, it closed again on its own, and the moment it shut, the seatbelt behind him tightened again, this time more firmly, as if whatever was there had just settled into place. And Mark's breathing started getting faster as he reached for his phone to cancel the ride. But the Uber app suddenly displayed a message he had never seen before: trip in progress, even though no rider was visible, and his cancellation button was grayed out, disabled, locked. At that exact moment, his radio turned on again, But this time, instead of static, a woman's voice came through clearly, soft and broken, saying, "Don't look back, just drive." And the voice didn't sound like it was coming from speakers. It sounded like it was inside the car itself, close to his ear, and Mark froze, eyes wide, whispering, "Who is this?" But the voice didn't respond. It only repeated the same line slower, more distorted, as if it was getting closer. And suddenly the temperature inside the car dropped sharply, so much that Mark could see his own breath forming in front of him, even though the AC was off. And that's when he felt it, the unmistakable feeling of something leaning slightly forward from the back seat, like weight shifting closer to him. Mark immediately slammed the accelerator and drove forward, leaving the bus stop behind. But the road ahead became worse because every street light he passed began flickering and dying one by one behind him, and the GPS voice stopped giving directions and instead started whispering random broken words like "closer, closer, don't stop." And Mark's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. And then suddenly, his phone started playing a recording of a girl crying softly, but the sound was not normal. It felt like it was echoing from inside the car seats, not the phone itself. And Mark shouted, "Stop it! Who is in my car?" And the moment he said that, the crying instantly stopped, replaced by absolute silence. And in that silence, a voice whispered directly behind his right ear, so close it felt like breath on skin, saying, "You picked me up?" Mark screamed and swerved the car slightly, nearly hitting the roadside ditch, and panic fully took over as he tried to unlock doors. But all four doors locked automatically with child safety engaged, and nothing responded. And the rearview mirror suddenly fogged up from the inside, even though no moisture should have been there. And slowly words began forming in the fog, as if written by invisible fingers. "Turn around." Mark shook his head violently, refusing, but the steering wheel suddenly vibrated slightly on its own, forcing his attention backward. And then the seat belt behind him tightened so hard it felt like pressure on his spine, and his body started turning slightly against his will. And when he finally glanced into the back seat reflection in the window, he saw it. A pale woman sitting directly behind him with black, empty eyes, and her face far too close to his shoulder. But when he snapped his head fully around, there was nothing there again, only empty seat. And that's when the car suddenly shook violently, as if something heavy had fully sat down behind him. Mark lost control completely, hitting the horn repeatedly, but the sound stretched and distorted like metal screaming underwater, and the radio exploded into static, so loud it felt like pressure in his skull. And then everything stopped instantly. Engine, radio, lights, everything, dead silence. And in that silence, all doors unlocked at once. Mark didn't think twice. He jumped out and ran straight into the darkness of the road, not looking back even once, running until his lungs burned and his vision blurred. And when he finally reached a distant gas station, shaking and sweating, he called police immediately, explaining everything. But when officers arrived at Hollow Creek Road, the area was completely normal again. No flickering lights, no silence, no abandoned bus stop. And his car was parked neatly on the roadside with engine off and doors closed, and inside it, everything looked perfectly fine. No signs of disturbance at all, except for one thing that made the officers stop talking completely. Because on the inside of the rearview mirror, there was fresh fog forming, even though nobody was inside. And it had written 3 words slowly appearing from nothing. "Next driver waits." It was 2:13 a.m. in Chicago, Illinois, when Jason Miller, a 29-year-old Uber driver, sat alone in his car parked near a closed gas station, staring at his phone while thinking about ending his shift because the night felt unusually heavy and silent. But before he could turn the app off, a new ride request suddenly appeared on his screen that made his stomach tighten immediately, because the pickup location was St. Viral Mental Hospital, an abandoned psychiatric facility that locals said was sealed off after strange disappearances, locked doors opening on their own, and security guards refusing to work night shifts near the building. And Jason stared at it for a few seconds, thinking it had to be a glitch or prank. But the payout was extremely high for a short ride, and his financial situation pushed him into making a bad decision. So against his instinct, he accepted it. And the moment he did, The app froze for a second before refreshing and showing the passenger name, Evelyn Carter, with no profile picture, no rating, no history, nothing at all, just a blank identity attached to a location no normal rider would request. But Jason tried to stay calm and started driving anyway, as the city behind him slowly became emptier and quieter the closer he got to the hospital zone, where street lights began flickering one by one in irregular timing and traffic completely disappeared as if every other driver was avoiding the same direction. And even his GPS voice started acting strange, repeating turns twice in a delayed robotic tone as if something was interfering with it. And Jason muttered that his phone must be glitching, but the Uber app itself stayed locked on the route like it was forcing him forward. And as he crossed into the outskirts of the hospital area, the environment changed completely because there were no more active buildings, no people, no sound, only long, empty roads surrounded by industrial ruins fading into darkness. And in the distance, St. Viral Mental Hospital appeared like a massive dead structure, standing alone, with broken windows and a rusted iron gate that should have been locked for years, yet was already slightly open as if something had already entered or exited recently. And Jason slowed down, feeling a strange pressure in the air, and when he finally stopped at the entrance, the engine suddenly sounded too loud because the silence outside was unnatural, like sound itself was being absorbed, and Jason checked his phone again and saw something that made his chest tighten because the app now showed arriving in 0 minutes, even though no passenger had entered his car at all. And that's when he slowly turned his head toward the back seat, expecting nothing, but the interior light flickered once, and in that brief flash, he thought he saw a faint outline of a woman sitting directly behind him, but when he looked again, the seat was completely empty. Yet the seat belt behind him slowly lifted upward and clicked once as if fastening itself around something invisible. And Jason whispered, "Evelyn." But there was no answer, only silence, so heavy it felt unnatural. And then suddenly the rear right door unlocked by itself with a loud mechanical click that echoed through the empty night, and the door slowly swung open outward toward the hospital entrance, even though there was no wind or movement at all. And after a few seconds it closed again on its own, but the moment it shut, the seatbelt behind him tightened slightly as if something had just settled deeper into the seat. And Jason's breathing became faster as he reached for his phone, trying to cancel the ride, but the app suddenly changed to trip in progress, and the cancel button disappeared completely. And at that exact moment, the radio turned on by itself, producing a slow, broken piano sound that felt like it was coming from inside a large, empty building rather than speakers. And between the notes, a woman's voice whispered softly, "Take me home." And Jason froze because the voice did not feel like it came from the radio. It felt like it was inside the car right next to his ear. And when he looked around, there was no one, but the temperature dropped sharply, and he could see his breath forming inside the vehicle, even though the AC was off. And then the GPS voice stopped completely, and instead a faint whisper repeated, "You are already here." And Jason immediately started the engine and drove forward into the hospital driveway, even though every instinct in his body was telling him not to move. But the car itself felt slightly unresponsive, like something else was controlling small parts of its movement, guiding him forward until he stopped directly in front of the hospital entrance, where the large doors slowly opened inward, revealing a long, dark hallway, where flickering lights turned off one by one, as if something was walking deeper inside the building. And Jason shouted, "I'm not going in there." But his voice echoed strangely, like the car itself was repeating it back. And suddenly the hospital doors slammed shut violently on their own, as if reacting to something unseen. And Jason realized with growing fear that whatever was happening was not outside the car, but already inside it, because the back seat suddenly felt heavier, like something had fully taken shape there, and the seatbelt clicked again tighter than before. And Jason slowly turned his head, but still saw nothing except empty seat and a slight depression in the fabric, like someone invisible was sitting there. And then the rear-view mirror began fogging up from the inside, even though there was no moisture, and words started forming slowly, saying, "Don't look directly." And Jason shook his head, refusing, but the steering wheel vibrated slightly, as if forcing his attention backward. And then he heard breathing right behind his neck, slow, wet, and close. And when he turned instantly, there was nothing there, yet in the reflection of the window glass, he saw a pale woman with black hollow eyes, sitting inches behind his shoulder staring at him. But when he fully turned around, the seat was empty again, and that was when the car shook violently, as if something heavy had fully sat down in the back seat. And Jason screamed, hitting the horn repeatedly, but the sound stretched and distorted, like metal being dragged underwater, while the radio exploded into unbearable static that filled his skull until suddenly everything stopped at once. Engine lights, radio, everything went completely silent. And in that silence, the doors unlocked instantly, and Jason didn't wait. He opened the door and ran into the empty road, not looking back, even once running, until his lungs burned and his vision blurred. And when he finally reached a distant gas station, shaking and barely able to speak, he called police immediately. And when officers arrived at St. Viral Mental Hospital, the entire area looked completely normal. No flickering lights, no open gate, no strange silence. Just an abandoned building like any other, and Jason's car was parked neatly outside, engine off, doors closed perfectly fine. But when officers checked inside the car, they found nothing except one detail that made them all stop talking, because on the inside of the rear window, there was fresh fog forming from nowhere, even though nobody was inside, and it slowly wrote 3 words: "She never left." And Jason's phone still showed one active trip, Evelyn Carter, in progress. Even though no passenger was ever found, and even after days, the ride never ended in the system, as if something was still sitting in that back seat, moving with him inside the app itself, waiting for the next time he would open it again. And every night after that, Jason still heard a faint seatbelt click sound whenever he closed his car door, even when the car was empty. It was 3:04 a.m. in Dallas, Texas, when Ethan Brooks, a 31-year-old Uber driver who had been working night shifts for extra money after losing his office job, sat inside his car parked under a dim streetlight outside a closed diner, scrolling through ride requests while feeling the strange heaviness of the night pressing on him more than usual. And just as he thought about going offline, a new request popped up on his screen that made him pause for a second, because the pickup location was a place called Red Valley Road, Mile 13, a road that locals said was not even fully mapped properly anymore, a stretch of highway surrounded by empty land where phone signals disappeared randomly, and drivers reported hearing voices on their radios even when nothing was playing. And Ethan frowned, thinking it must be a system error, but the payout was unusually high again, much higher than a normal ride of that distance. And after hesitating for a moment, he convinced himself it was probably just some drunk passenger stuck on the highway. So he accepted the ride, and the moment he did, the app froze for a second before updating the passenger name to Noah Reed. But there was no profile picture, no rating, no trip history, and the pickup notes simply said, "Don't speak during the ride," which made Ethan uncomfortable, but he shrugged it off and started driving anyway, as the city lights slowly faded behind him and the roads became emptier and wider, stretching into darkness like they had no end. And the further he drove, the more he noticed something strange. His GPS was slightly off, recalculating the route every few seconds, even though he hadn't changed direction. And the radio in his car started producing faint static bursts, even though it was turned off. And Ethan muttered that maybe his car battery was acting up, but deep down he felt something was wrong, because the entire highway ahead looked abandoned. No cars, no trucks, no movement. Only long, empty asphalt leading into darker emptiness. And when he finally reached Mile 13 of Red Valley Road, there was nothing there except a single old broken street sign and a car parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking even though no one was inside. And Ethan slowed down, feeling uneasy as his Uber app suddenly changed from arriving to arrived, even though he had not stopped properly. And the pickup marker was now directly on his position. And before he could react, the passenger door behind him unlocked with a sharp click, making him flinch, and he turned slightly but saw no one. Only empty seat, yet the seat belt in the back slowly lifted and clicked as if fastening itself around an invisible person. And Ethan's breathing became shallow as he whispered, "Hello, Noah?" But there was no response, only a faint sound of static now coming from inside the car instead of the radio. And then the radio itself turned on without warning, playing a distorted version of his own voice saying, "Don't speak during the ride." And Ethan froze completely because he had never spoken those words before, yet the voice was identical to him. And then suddenly the GPS voice changed and started speaking in reverse tones, saying, "You are already driving. You are already driving." And Ethan slammed the brakes, but the car didn't stop immediately. It rolled forward slowly like something else was controlling the momentum, and the road ahead suddenly seemed longer than before, stretching unnaturally into darkness. And that's when he noticed the first real, terrifying change. The passenger seat mirror reflection behind him was fogging up even though there was no moisture in the car. And slowly words started forming in that fog, saying, "Don't look behind." And Ethan's hands shook as he tried unlocking the doors, but all four doors locked instantly, child safety engaged, and the lock sound repeated twice like confirmation from something else. And then he heard breathing behind him, slow and steady, like someone was sitting just inches away from his neck. And when he turned his head slightly, he saw nothing, only empty seat. But in the window reflection, he saw a man sitting directly behind him wearing a blank expression, too close, too still, eyes completely black. And when Ethan fully turned around, there was nothing there again, only pressure in the air. And the radio suddenly exploded into loud static, so intense it felt like pressure inside his skull. And then the voice came again, now whispering from every direction at once. "You brought me here. Now, keep driving." And Ethan panicked, hitting the horn repeatedly, but the sound stretched unnaturally like metal being dragged through water, and the car suddenly vibrated as if something heavy had fully settled into the back seat. And Ethan screamed, trying to open the door, but the locks refused, and the road outside the windshield began flickering like reality itself was unstable. And then everything went silent at once. The engine stopped, the radio died, the lights dimmed, and in that total silence the doors unlocked instantly, and Ethan didn't wait. He shoved the door open and ran into the darkness of the highway, running until his legs burned and his breath collapsed. And when he finally reached a distant truck stop hours later, shaking and unable to speak properly, he called police immediately. But when officers arrived at mile 13 on Red Valley Road, there was no abandoned highway car, no broken sign, no blinking hazards, only empty roads stretching normally as if nothing had ever happened. But Ethan's Uber app still showed one ongoing trip labeled Noah Reed in progress. And even more disturbing, the pickup point had changed and was now slowly moving along the same highway at the exact speed Ethan had been driving. And officers later reported that multiple drivers in the same area started receiving identical requests from Noah Reed, with the same instruction, "Don't speak during the ride." And every driver who accepted it reported the same final detail before their signal cut out completely. The passenger was never seen getting out, but the car always arrived somewhere empty, with the radio softly playing a voice repeating, keep driving," even after the engine was turned off. And Ethan never drove nights again, but sometimes, even when his phone was off, he would still hear a notification sound at exactly 3:04 a.m., like the app was still waiting for him to accept one more ride that never ended.